It was a quiet night at the Global Space Monitoring Station in Colorado. The massive radio dishes pointed at the stars, silently listening to the cosmos as they had done for decades. Tom Miller, the night shift operator, was sipping his third cup of coffee when the first signal came through. At first, he thought it was just another piece of space junk, one of the thousands of human-made objects that cluttered Earth's orbit. But this was different. The signal was coming from much further away, somewhere past Neptune. "Hey, Jack, come take a look at this," Tom called to his supervisor, who was doing his usual midnight rounds. Jack Walker, a veteran of 20 years at the station, leaned over Tom's shoulder. His eyes widened as he watched the pattern repeat on the screen. "This isn't random noise," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is structured. This is a message." Within an hour, the station was buzzing with activity. Scientists and analysts were pulled from their beds, and government officials were notified. The message was clearly artificial, and it was asking for help. It took the world's best computers 3 days to decode the first part of the message. When they did, the news shook the foundations of human civilization. They weren't alone in the universe, and their cosmic neighbors needed their help. The message came from something called the Stellar Concordat, a coalition of advanced civilizations. Their fleet of ships, nearly 1,000 strong, had become trapped in what they described as a gravitational anomaly near the edge of the solar system. Their advanced engines, capable of crossing vast distances between stars, were useless against these strange forces. In the United Nations emergency session that followed, representatives from every nation argued about how to respond. Some wanted to ignore the call, fearful of alien contact. Others saw it as humanity's chance to prove itself to the galaxy. "But what can we possibly offer them?" asked the French representative. "They crossed light years to get here. Their technology must be centuries ahead of ours." The American representative stood up. "Maybe that's exactly why they need us," she said. "Sometimes a new perspective is what you need. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one." The debate raged for days. Meanwhile, more messages arrived. The alien fleet situation was getting worse. The gravitational forces were slowly pulling their ships closer together. If nothing was done, they would eventually collide. Finally, the UN reached a decision. Humanity would help. They had no idea how, but they would try. The return message was simple. "We hear you. We're coming to help. Please hold on." The response from the Stellar Concordat was immediate. They sent coordinates for a safe landing zone on one of Pluto's moons, where human representatives could meet with their ambassadors. They also sent technical data about their situation, hoping Earth's scientists might see something their own experts had missed. As the first human mission to meet the aliens was being prepared, Tom sat at his monitoring station, still processing how his ordinary night shift had changed the course of human history. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, forgotten as he stared at the steady pulse of alien signals now flooding Earth's receivers. "You know what's funny?" Jack said, standing behind him again. "All these years, we thought first contact would be about them teaching us about the universe. Instead, they're asking us for help." Tom nodded, watching as more data scrolled across his screen. "Maybe that's the way it should be," he said. "Everyone needs help sometimes, even advanced aliens." Outside the station, the huge dishes continued their silent conversation with the stars. But now, they weren't just listening. They were talking back. Humanity had been called to solve a problem that had stumped some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy. Whether they would succeed or fail remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The universe had just become a much more interesting place. The small human ship approached the landing zone on Charon, Pluto's largest moon. Inside, Captain Mark Wilson tried to keep his breathing steady. After 3 months of space travel, they were about to become the first humans to meet intelligent alien life. "Landing sequence starting," announced Pete Rogers, the pilot. His hands moved carefully over the controls. "Everyone remember, gravity here is very weak." Don't make any sudden movements when we exit. The ship landed softly on the icy surface. Through the viewports, they could see the alien vessel waiting for them. It was beautiful, sleek and silver, like liquid metal frozen in space. Next to it, the human ship looked like an old tin can. "Well," Mark said, standing up, "let's not keep our new friends waiting." The four-person team made their way through the airlock. They wore the newest spacesuits Earth had to offer, though they probably looked ancient to their alien hosts. As they walked across the frozen surface, a door opened in the silver ship. The aliens that emerged weren't what anyone expected. They looked almost like clouds of light contained within transparent suits. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible in the low gravity. "Welcome, Earth representatives," a voice came through their radio systems. It spoke perfect English, clearly processed through some kind of translator. "We are the Emergency Council of the Stellar Concordat." The two groups met in the middle. Mark had rehearsed his greeting 100 times, but seeing these beings of light made him forget everything. He simply said, "We're here to help." Inside the alien ship, the humans were shown displays of the crisis. Nearly 1,000 ships were caught in what looked like a spider web of gravity lines, slowly being pulled together. "Our engines," explained one of the light beings, who called himself First Speaker, "use advanced quantum fields to move through space. But these gravity waves interfere with them. We cannot move forward or backward." "May I?" asked Linda Chase, the team's engineer. She pointed at the technical displays. The aliens moved aside, letting her study the data. "Your ships," she said slowly, "they're too advanced." When the aliens didn't respond, she continued, "You've evolved past mechanical systems. Everything is quantum fields and energy manipulation. But sometimes you need something simpler." She pulled out a small metal ball bearing from her pocket and let it float in the low gravity. "On Earth, we still use basic physics every day. Pulleys, levers, counterweights. Things that work even when complex systems fail." The aliens watched the ball bearing spin slowly in the air. Their light forms flickered, which the humans would later learn was their way of showing interest. "Are you suggesting," First Speaker said, "that primitive technology might succeed where our advanced systems have failed?" "Not primitive," Mark stepped in, seeing Linda frown at the word. "Basic. Fundamental. The universe runs on simple rules. Sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones." The aliens conferred among themselves, their light forms pulsing rapidly. Finally, First Speaker turned back to the humans. "In our drive to advance, we may have forgotten the foundations upon which all technology is built," they said. "We accept your help, Earth representatives. Show us these simple solutions you speak of." Over the next few hours, Linda and the team's physicist, Dr. Alan West, explained their initial ideas. They talked about ways to use mechanical forces to counter the gravity waves. The aliens listened, their light forms growing brighter with each suggestion. "It will be dangerous," First Speaker said when they finished. "These gravity waves are unpredictable. Any rescue attempt will put both your people and our ships at risk." Mark looked at his team. They all nodded. "That's why we came prepared to stay and work until we solve this," he said. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'No one gets left behind.'" The alien lights pulsed with what seemed like approval. Outside the ship's windows, the endless darkness of space stretched out before them. Somewhere in that darkness, 1,000 ships were waiting to be saved. The real work was about to begin. 2 weeks had passed since the first meeting. The command center set up on Charon now buzzed with activity as humans and aliens worked side by side. Linda Chase stood in front of a large holographic display, watching the simulation of their first rescue attempt run again. "The problem," she explained to the mixed team, "is similar to what deep-sea rescue teams face on Earth." She pointed to the web of gravity lines trapping the alien fleet. "These forces act like ocean currents, but in 3 dimensions." The aliens, their light forms dimmed to help humans see better in the room, watched intently. They had learned to read human expressions over the past weeks, just as humans had learned to interpret their pulses of light. On Earth, Linda continued, we use heavy cables and winch systems to pull ships from dangerous waters. We can adapt this idea for space. She pressed a button, and the hologram changed to show her design. First speaker moved forward, their light form flickering with concern. The materials needed for cables of this size don't exist, they said. The gravitational forces would tear them apart. That's where your technology comes in, Dr. Alan West said, stepping up beside Linda. He had barely slept in days, but his eyes were bright with excitement. We don't need physical cables. We can use your energy fields to create something similar. The team had discovered something fascinating. While the aliens' quantum drives failed in the gravity waves, their simpler energy field technology still worked. By combining this with basic human engineering principles, they might have found a solution. In the corner of the room, Pete Rogers worked with alien technicians to modify a small probe. They had stripped away its advanced systems, replacing them with basic mechanical thrusters. Sometimes, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, you need to go backward to move forward. Captain Mark Wilson entered the room, carrying new data from the trapped fleet. We need to hurry, he announced. 3 more ships reported hull stress warnings. The gravity is slowly crushing them together. Linda nodded and turned back to the hologram. We're ready for a test run. We'll use the probe to carry our modified energy tether to the nearest ship. If it works, we can start rescuing the smaller vessels first. The aliens watched as the humans made final adjustments to their equipment. First speaker approached Mark. Your people work differently than ours, they observed. You make mistakes. Adjust. Try again. We seek perfection before action. That's because we're used to learning the hard way, Mark replied with a smile. On Earth, we rarely get things right the first time, but we always keep trying. Hours later, the team gathered in the launch control room. The probe sat ready on its pad, looking like a strange mix of advanced alien technology and something built in someone's garage. Launch in 5 minutes, Pete announced from his control station. The aliens had insisted he pilot the probe, impressed by his ability to handle unexpected situations. Linda checked the energy field generators one last time. They had stripped down the alien technology to its basics, making it more resistant to the gravity waves. It wasn't elegant, but it might work. You know, Alan said quietly to her, if this works, we'll be rewriting physics textbooks back home. The way these energy fields interact with gravity. It's revolutionary. First, let's save the fleet, Linda replied. We can write textbooks later. The countdown reached 0. The probe lifted off, carrying humanity's best attempt at solving an impossible problem. As it disappeared into the darkness, headed toward the trapped fleet, human and alien observers held their breath, or whatever passed for breathing among the light beings. First speaker's form pulsed softly. Whether this succeeds or fails, they said, you have already taught us something valuable. Sometimes the path forward requires looking backward. Mark watched the probe's signal on the tracking screen. That's the funny thing about progress, he said. It doesn't always look like what you expect. The probe moved steadily toward its target, carrying with it the hopes of 2 civilizations and proof that sometimes the simplest solutions come from the most unexpected places. The first rescue attempt failed spectacularly. The probe reached the trapped fleet, but exploded in a bright flash of light when it tried to activate the energy tether. In the control room on Charon, humans and aliens watched in silence as the debris scattered across space. Well, Linda said, breaking the heavy silence, now we know what doesn't work. First speaker's light form dimmed considerably. Perhaps we were wrong to think this could succeed. The forces involved are too great. But Pete Rogers was already reviewing the data from the probe's final moments. Wait, he said, leaning closer to his screen. Look at this. He pointed to a series of readings just before the explosion. The team gathered around his station, The probe's simple mechanical systems had continued sending data even after its advanced systems had failed. Those last readings showed something unexpected about the gravity waves. "They're not random," Alan said, his eyes widening. "There's a pattern. We couldn't see it before because all the alien sensors were too sensitive. They were picking up too much information." Linda grabbed a marker and started drawing on a whiteboard, an ancient human tool that had amused the aliens at first, but that they now found fascinating. "The gravity waves pulse," she explained, drawing waves and arrows. "Like waves in the ocean, they have peaks and troughs. And our simple probe spotted this because—" Mark started. "Because it wasn't smart enough to get confused," Pete finished. "Sometimes being simple makes you more reliable." The aliens gathered around the whiteboard, their light forms pulsing with renewed interest. First speaker moved closer to examine Linda's drawings. "You're saying we need to time our rescue attempts between the pulses?" "Exactly," Linda said. "Like surfers on Earth waiting for the right wave. We don't fight the gravity. We work with it." The next 12 hours were a blur of activity. The team built a new probe, even simpler than the first. They removed every piece of advanced technology that wasn't absolutely necessary. What remained looked more like an old Earth satellite than an alien rescue vessel. "It's not pretty," Pete said as he ran the final checks. "But it's tough." The launch window would be short. They had calculated that the gravity waves weakened for about 30 seconds between pulses. That was their chance. As they prepared for the second attempt, first speaker approached Mark. "Your people are remarkable," they said. "Where we see failure, you see data. Where we see impossibility, you see a puzzle to solve." "That's because humans have been failing and learning for thousands of years," Mark replied. "It's kind of our specialty." The countdown began again. This time, the entire trapped fleet was watching. The aliens had shared the human solution with their people, and despite their initial doubts, hope had begun to spread among the ships. The probe launched during a gravity pulse trough. Everyone watched as it approached the nearest tracked ship, a small scout vessel on the edge of the fleet. This time, they waited for the next trough before activating the energy tether. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the scout ship began to move. The simple mechanical winch system, combined with the alien energy field, was actually working. The ship was being pulled free. The control room erupted in cheers, human voices mixing with the bright flashing of alien light forms. But Linda was already focused on the next step. "One ship down," she said, making notes on her whiteboard. 999 to go. First speaker's form glowed brightly. "We had forgotten that progress doesn't always mean making things more complex. Sometimes, as you humans say, less is more." Mark looked at his team. The humans who had come billions of miles to help, and the aliens who had learned to trust in simple solutions. "We're going to need more probes," he said. "A lot more probes." Outside, against the backdrop of distant stars, a small Earth probe continued its work, proving that sometimes the best technology isn't the newest or the most advanced. It's the one that gets the job done. 3 days after their first successful rescue, Linda couldn't sleep. She sat in the quiet control room, staring at the holographic display of the trapped fleet. The rescued scout ship was safely docked at the Karen base, but saving one small ship had taken hours. At this rate, it would take years to save them all. "You're thinking too hard," said a familiar voice. Pete walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, a luxury they'd brought from Earth that the aliens found fascinating. "The gravity waves are getting stronger," Linda said, accepting the coffee. "Each pulse is bigger than the last. We need something faster than our current method." She pulled up the data from their successful rescue. The simple probe had worked perfectly, but it could only help one ship at a time. Meanwhile, the gravitational forces were slowly pushing the remaining fleet closer together. Alan burst into the room, his eyes wide with excitement. "I've got it," he shouted, startling both Linda and Pete. "Remember what you said about surfing, Linda. "We're thinking too small." He rushed to the whiteboard and started drawing. "Look, we've been treating each gravity wave like an enemy. But what if we treat the whole field like one big wave?" Linda stood up so quickly she almost spilled her coffee. "Like a tsunami," she whispered. "Exactly." Alan's marker squeaked across the board. "Instead of fighting each wave, we ride the big one." First speaker entered the room, their light form dimming to adjust to the human's eyes. "What have you discovered?" Linda pointed to Alan's drawings. "On Earth, there's a saying, 'A rising tide lifts all boats.' What if we use the gravity field itself to power our rescue?" The next few hours were a blur of calculations and simulations. They would need to modify their energy tether design. Instead of fighting against the gravity, they would use it to create a sort of wave that could carry ships to safety. Mark joined them as they prepared to test their new theory. "It's risky," he said, looking at the calculations. "If we get the timing wrong, we could push the ships together faster." "Everything worth doing is risky," Pete replied, already programming the test sequence. They modified 3 probes with the new design. Instead of trying to pull ships out one by one, these probes would work together to create a gravitational counterwave. If it worked, they could move dozens of ships at once. The aliens watched with interest as the humans installed simple mechanical backup systems on each probe. "You still trust in basic mechanics?" First speaker asked. "Always have a backup plan," Linda said, tightening the last bolt, "especially when your main plan involves surfing on waves of gravity." The launch window was approaching. The 3 probes sat ready, looking like a strange mix of Earth satellites and alien technology. They had stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving only what was needed for their wild plan. "Launch in 10 seconds, Pete announced from his control station. Everyone held their breath. The probes shot into space, taking up positions around a cluster of trapped ships. They waited for the next major gravity pulse, timing their activation perfectly. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the gravity field began to change. The probes weren't fighting against it anymore. They were working with it, shaping it, turning it into something useful. "It's working," Alan shouted, pointing at the readings. The cluster of ships was moving, riding the modified gravity wave toward safety. First speaker's form glowed brighter than ever. "Remarkable. You've turned the very force that trapped us into the means of our escape." Linda was already calculating how many ships they could move with each wave. "We'll need to build more probes, but we can save them all now. We have a real chance." Mark watched the first group of ships drift to safety. "See what happens when you think simple," he said to first speaker. The alien's light form, pulsed with what humans had learned, was laughter. "Indeed, your people have taught us that sometimes the most advanced solution is to remember the basics." Outside, against the dark canvas of space, more ships began to move, carried by waves of gravity that humans had learned to tame with nothing more than simple machines and clever thinking. The next 2 weeks were the busiest anyone could remember. The base on Charon had turned into a massive construction site, with humans and aliens working together to build more probes. They had perfected the design, making each probe simpler and stronger than the last. "Production lines ready for the next batch," Linda called out, wiping grease from her hands. They had set up what looked like an old-fashioned assembly line, something that made the aliens curious. "Your methods seem random," one of the alien engineers said, their light form flickering with confusion as they watched humans putting pieces together by hand. "Not random," Pete replied, testing a mechanical thruster. "Flexible. Sometimes you need to adjust things on the fly." They had already rescued nearly 200 ships, but time was running out. The gravity waves were getting stronger, and the remaining ships were being pushed closer together. They needed to work faster. Mark stood in the control center, watching the latest group of probes move into position. "Status report," he called out. "Wave patterns are holding steady," Alan responded from his station. But we got a problem with Group 7. Their ships are too tightly packed. The aliens had organized their tracked ships into groups, making it easier for the rescue teams to work. But Group 7, near the center of the gravity field, was in the worst position. We need to split that group up before we can move them, Linda said, studying the holographic display. But we'll need to get closer than we've ever gone to the center of the field. First speaker's form pulsed with concern. The gravitational forces there are extreme. We've lost probes trying to reach that area before. Then we'll just have to make tougher probes, Pete said, already sketching modifications on a tablet. The next few hours were tense. They built 5 new probes, stripping them down to absolute basics. No fancy computers, no complex systems, just strong materials, simple mechanics, and the modified energy tethers that had worked so well. Launch window in 5 minutes, the control room announced. Everyone took their positions. The new probes launched perfectly, heading toward the densely packed ships of Group 7. As they got closer to the center of the gravity field, the forces became visible even to the naked eye, bending light around them. Probes reaching critical distance. Alan called out. Energy readings are off the charts. Linda watched the readings carefully. Wait for it. Wait for it. Now. The probes activated their energy tethers just as a massive gravity wave peaked. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, slowly, the ships in Group 7 began to move apart. It's working, someone shouted. The control room erupted in cheers. But their celebration was cut short. One of the probes started spinning out of control, caught in an unexpected gravity surge. We're losing probe 3, Pete shouted, his hands flying over the controls. Mark leaned forward. Can we stabilize it? The advanced systems are fried, Pete replied. Then he smiled. But the mechanical backup is still working. Switching to basic controls now. The probe steadied itself, its simple thrusters keeping it in position while its more advanced systems were completely dead. The rescue continued. Over the next few hours, they moved ship after ship from Group 7 to safety. Each rescue was harder than the last as the gravity waves grew stronger, but the simple, tough probes kept working. First speaker watched in amazement. Your people have achieved what we thought impossible, they said to Mark. And you did it by ignoring everything we thought we knew about advanced technology. Mark smiled, watching another group of ships drift to safety. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that can't break down, he said. My grandfather used to say that a hammer might not be fancy, but it always works. As the last ships from Group 7 reached safety, the team was already preparing for the next group. They had proven that their method worked, even under the worst conditions. Now it was just a matter of time and determination. 2 things humans had plenty of. Outside, against the star-filled sky, the rescue fleet of simple probes continued their work, proving that sometimes the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy needed to learn things from the newcomers. 1 month after the rescue operation began, the last ship drifted safely away from the gravity field. In the control room on Charon, humans and aliens watched together as the final readings came in. The mission was complete. All 1,000 ships had been saved. I still can't believe we did it, Pete said, shutting down his control station for the last time. The room felt strangely quiet now, after weeks of constant activity. Linda stood by the whiteboard where it had all started. It was still covered with their early calculations and drawings. First speaker approached her, their light form glowing softly. We will keep this, they said, gesturing to the whiteboard. It will be displayed in the Great Hall of Innovation on our homeworld, a reminder that true progress sometimes means remembering old wisdom. The news of the rescue had spread across the galaxy. Other alien civilizations had sent representatives to learn how humans had solved a problem that had stumped the most advanced races in known space. Mark met with these representatives in what had become known as the Simple Solution Summit. The irony of the fancy name made him smile. The key, he explained to the gathered aliens, wasn't to build something more advanced. It was to understand the basic rules of the universe and work with them, not against them. Alan had set up a demonstration area where he showed alien engineers how simple mechanical systems could work alongside their advanced technology. The aliens were particularly fascinated by pulleys and levers. These principles, one alien observer noted, have been forgotten by many civilizations as they advanced. Perhaps we have all become too dependent on complex solutions. The Stellar Concordat made Earth an official member of their alliance that day. But more importantly, they created a new position within their council: advisors of fundamental engineering. Humans would hold this position permanently. Your people, first speaker announced during the ceremony, have shown us that advancement doesn't always mean making things more complicated. Sometimes it means remembering what we've forgotten. As the human team prepared to return to Earth, they received messages from across the galaxy. Ships were being redesigned with mechanical backup systems. Ancient engineering principles were being studied again. A new age of technology was beginning, one that balanced the old with the new. Linda found Tom Miller, the night shift operator who had first received the distress signal, looking out at the stars through the base's window. "Did you ever imagine," she asked, "that your quiet night shift would lead to all this?" Tom shook his head. "Never. But you know what's really amazing? We didn't have to become like them to help them. We just had to be ourselves." The journey back to Earth would take 3 months, but this time they wouldn't travel alone. A fleet of alien ships would escort them, their crews eager to learn more from their new human allies. In the ship's common room, Mark found first speaker looking at a simple wrench with great interest. "We will remember this," first speaker said. "How humans taught the galaxy that strength lies not in abandoning the simple for the complex, but in knowing when to use each." "Just don't forget to keep a hammer handy," Mark replied with a smile. "Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways." As their ship broke orbit from Charon, the team looked back at the place where humans had first proved themselves to the galaxy. The massive gravity field that had trapped so many ships was still there, but now it was being studied. Scientists were learning from it, understanding it, using simple tools to measure complex forces. "You know," Pete said from the pilot's seat, "they're calling this the human approach now, solving big problems with simple solutions." Linda laughed. "Wait until they learn about duct tape." The ship turned toward Earth, carrying with it the beginning of a new chapter in human history. They had been called to save a stranded alien fleet, but in doing so, they had given the galaxy something far more valuable. A reminder that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution, and that progress doesn't always mean leaving the basics behind.